I thought when I would be making this video it would be primarily about the Ableton Push 3, but I realized during the making it would be more interesting to talk more broadly about live electronic music performance as an artistic practice. In this video, I'm going to cover my specific journey and approach to live electronic music. I'll talk about the development process I went through to get to where I am now, the technical ins and outs, and a little bit about my broad philosophy when it comes to this form of performance art. This practice is not particularly entry-level friendly. The equipment is expensive, and it takes quite a bit of time to get integrated with. I'll probably be using a little bit of technical jargon. I have a pretty technical mindset and personality, but I will try to keep it understandable and approachable for those not deep into the practice. With the Push 3 costing 3,000 Australian dollars and most of the other stuff I use probably within the vicinity of a couple grand in total, this practice isn't really for the half-hearted, and it's definitely an investment financially and time. I guess the question this video is trying to answer or trigger some thought around is live electronic music performance a worthwhile practice for me and for you? I've been writing electronic music in digital audio workstations since 2009. I've always used Ableton, starting with Live 8. I've written a bunch of different genres under a few different aliases, most of which are defunct and or in retirement now. Producing electronic music was the primary focus of my life in my early 20s. I was doing it nearly entirely with a keyboard and mouse on a crappy old HP laptop. My first digital instrument was the original Push. In the week or so after I picked it up, I wrote something like 20 different tracks, all of which were more interesting and musical than I had previously written. It felt like at the time that this was the first music that kind of just naturally came to me, or like emanated from my soul. It was more melodic and not really like techno or bass music or anything like that. I'll put a couple of little clips in here. I first got properly interested in live performance around 2017 when I first started doing live ambient music performances. There would generally just be a few synth loops which I could manipulate via a Midi controller. I just wanted to make nice sounding, kind of long form ambient music for the most part. At the time I actually called it noise music, which I learned that was not that later. At some point I saw Kink's Moscow Boiler Room live set alongside a few other videos of amazing artists performing live. Of course, Daft Punk's Alive sets were among these. These performances were really and truly live, like alive, fully interactive and reactive to the environment and audience around the performer. There's something so mind-bendingly amazing about them, and I still think that. It seemed like it was kind of just being categorized under the umbrella term DJing, when it was really something else entirely. After these experiences, I really wanted to be a musical performer, alongside being a music producer. I wanted to be able to create art in the moment, pulling together something from nothing, doing and being the art. At the time I could write music pretty well with a keyboard and mouse, but I couldn't play it that well. I didn't, and in some parts still don't, feel like a really natural melodic musician. I played drums for my teenage years and into my early 20s, and I was pretty good at that, but I never really gelled that well with like keyboards and guitars and stuff. Fast forward a couple years, All the while using the push to aid in my music composition process, I embarked on a mission to develop a performance style that would enable me to play and improvise electronic music, sets that would be unique each and every time I played. To do this, I needed to get better and more integrated with instruments and harmonies and chords and melodies. I needed to learn how to play better music. To do this required practice. I found an effective method was playing along to lo-fi hip-hop drum loops, with the goal of writing music that kind of obeyed the laws of music theory. I was training my brain and hands to hit the right notes. I made a concerted effort at this time to relearn music theory, but in the context of the push and its chromatic mode. I would go to the library with my push controller and watch videos on music theory and draw out chord shapes in my little notepad book and experiment and play. I've linked a good video in the description that helped me at the time. In terms of melodic access and performability, I think the nature of this musical interface is a big step in the direction of greater access for people that have an interface with more conventional instruments like keyboards and guitars. Once you learn some chord shapes, you can easily employ them and alter them to your ear's taste. It's easier to learn than a keyboard or a guitar, at least as far as I've experienced. You don't have to learn the idiosyncrasies and muscle memories of these instruments to create musically interesting melodies, chords, and bass lines. Intervals are always in the same place relative to the note you're hitting. This is a perfect fourth, directly above, and this is a perfect fifth. And this is an octave, so +5 and +7. The instrument also has a repeat function that quantizes what you're putting into it. So to some degree, you can kind of just go for it and get something workable. Another feature of this instrument that feels game-changing is it plays back what you've put into it in both an audio and visual sense. This is a big deal as it invites a whole extra sense into the music writing process, and it makes things clear and replicatable. I'm at a point now where I actually think of chords and shapes on the grid. My current setup for the performance is the Push 3 standalone, a Roland TR8S drum machine, an Akai Midi mix, and a Korg Chaos Pad 3. The Push serves as the main brain, the MIDI clock, and the music and audio hub. I use it to generate musical ideas, solo on, play with parameters, and trigger and cue scenes and clips. It is also the final frontier of audio processing before it goes to the DJ mixer. The Push 3, with its MPE-enabled pads, really has to make it one of the most incredibly expressive and spectacular instruments, digital or not, that humankind has ever created. The multi-note pitch bending functionality means you can bend chord progressions, which is an entirely new field of sonic possibility. I'd like to do a whole video on this. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Playing and particularly soloing on this instrument feels very natural. Doesn't feel digital. It feels like you're playing a stringed instrument, something with like real, realness. Like something you can hold and is there, but it can make any sound you want. There's no human words that explain the possibilities of this. I'd be keen to see how good a person could get at playing this if they were playing it from a really young age. The TR8S drum machine. Each of these faders represents the volume of a different percussive loop that can be changed and altered with the knobs directly above it. I've found this to be an excellent machine for my purposes. The drum audio is sent via stereo pair through the Chaos Pad to the Push's audio input. For a long while, I was sending the drums to the DJ mixer on a separate channel, and there is definitely some utility to doing this, but it is harder to set up and ultimately means you have less sonic possibilities. By sending it through Ableton, you can EQ it, put effects on it, put high and low pass filters on it, and by doing it this way, these effect parameters are much more centralized and not away from the performance gear on the DJ mixer. The Akai Midi Mix. This controller is used for editing MIDI and audio effect parameters on the Push. This device is key to making the whole setup work. It hardwires digital MIDI parameters into the physical world and makes them at easy access when performing. The Chaos Pad. I basically just like the interface of this piece of gear. It has tons of wicked effects like beat repeats, delays, and filters. It looks really cool and it's easy to use. It's actually kind of crap. It cuts off the tails on effects when you choose a different one, but I just put up with it because it's cool looking. This is a substantially minimalized version of a setup of gear I was using about a year or more ago. I've found through my experience that less is more when it comes to devices, and the more refined you can get in terms of setup, the more refined your musical output will be. This is because you'll be greater interfaced with less things, and you'll be less on a need-to-know basis with hardware, so you can focus on the music and the quality of the output. My studio is set up to enable me to practice in a real performance setting, with all of the audio being routed as it would be live. It is also set up for me to be able to multi-track jams without having to go too much under the hood into settings and interrupting the creative flow. The desk I have in my studio is a Tascam Model 24. This can record up to 24 channels of 24-bit 48K audio straight onto an SD card. It's a fabulous and beautiful desk that suits all of my needs better than anything I'm aware of. It has USB and can be used directly as an audio interface connected to your computer, which I was doing originally. Nowadays, I am using all live analog signals directly into it. The Push 3 has 2 stereo outputs on its physical hardware, a single stereo 1-2 out, and then a 1/4-inch headphone jack that can be configured to mirroring the master send, or being a second separate audio channel. By connecting an ADAT interface, the ins and outs of the Push can be brought up to 10 in total. For this, I use an RME Fireface 400. This is an older interface that doesn't even have USB, but it has fantastic sound quality, works perfectly and rock solidly once it's configured, and it was relatively cheap for a high quality interface. I think largely due to it not having USB. The TR8S is also set up to be either sent into the Push or multi-tracked directly into the audio desk. I've got it set up so there's duplicate kits right next to each other in the device that have everything the same except the kit's audio routing. So I can change the entire routing of the machine with a flick of a switch, which is pretty cool. Right now there is no easy switch for the Push to be put into multi-tracking mode. I have to manually change the signal path for each instrument, changing it from sending it to the master to its ideal destination on the audio desk. Massive first world problem. The Push 3 appears to have 16 in and outs in its software framework, but these don't seem to be linked up in the hardware. I assume this is maybe future-proofing the device, maybe for an upgrade at some point. Oddly, these outputs work, but these ones don't. I'm not exactly sure even where to begin on this, because I actually feel like I've ironed out most of the things that gave me grief, and I've, I guess, mostly largely forgotten them, but there's been many issues to fix over the years. One of the most pressing issues I was facing more recently, for the first 6 months or so of owning the Push 3, I was encountering an issue where note mode would freeze if I queued a few different commands in quick succession. Usually it would be triggered by hitting the new button alongside the record button, which you do that quite a bit. It's basically just a command to start a data recording of your new musical idea. This would sometimes trigger a freeze in note mode, which would last for seemingly a completely random amount of time. Sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes like half an hour or more, before randomly unfreezing, or sometimes just never. This was obviously a device breaking bug, and I couldn't trust the device to perform on in standalone mode. I swear I tried every combination imaginable to try and get this to unfreeze, but could never do it. It was not until a recent beta update that it seems to have been fixed, or at least band-aided. I definitely had a lot of creative jams ruined by this bug, as I can't progress in my performance style if I can't put in new information. Imagine if a painter's brush just like froze. Over New Year's, I performed a live set and got through the 90 minutes without this happening. The beta update came through only like a week before the performance, so it was a pretty last minute readjustment to doing the set in standalone mode. I'm glad it paid off, and it didn't happen during the set. It was a real pleasure to perform without a screen in sight. The new setup where I'm running the drums into the push encounters a new problem. Due to digital conversion processing time, the drums would come in late, and it sounds really bad. To fix this, I need to offset the drum machine's Midi sync by between -40 and -160 milliseconds. This amount seems to change every time I press play in a performance, which is hopefully just once, but it basically just needs to be beat matched into sync. The metronome function on the push makes this pretty easy. Once it's in sync, it tends to stay there, or it just doesn't. During the New Year's Art Valley set, I had to sync it at the start and about 70 minutes into the performance. It's not too much of an issue at this point, but I do tend to keep an ear on it, especially if I hear any kind of audio glitching, which tends to throw it out. If you want to map MIDI parameters to an external controller like the Akai MIDI Mix, you definitely can, but you'll need to do it inside Ableton on your computer with the device attached. There is currently no way to map these things on the Push 3 itself, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, not without like a total user interface revamp. It'd be nice if this Learn button did this. Hint nudge Ableton. Once the MIDI mapping parameters are set up on the Ableton project in your computer, I save it, collect all, and then transfer it over to the Push. Whilst preparing for a live set, I'll generally transfer the project back and forth between the Push and my laptop a couple of times. I basically undertake a process of setup, experimentation, and then refinement. I want easy access to tools and sounds and mediums that will go together nicely and coherently. You can think of this like a painter picking out their paints before approaching the canvas. Now that the technical stuff is set up and the creative workspace has been built in both the software and the hardware, we can finally talk about creativity, which is apparently what this is all about. Creatively speaking, I'll set up like a dozen or so instruments that go together kind of nicely, and I'll configure it so they can be manipulated or heavily altered through set knobs and faders. I want the scope and possibilities to be wide in musicality, but I also want it so it can be delicately refined during a performance. Subtle changes make big differences in electronic music. I configure it so one fader will take a sound from something relatively simple to something like harmonically rich. To keep things moving and for transitional moments in the music when something is changing, I use the return channels quite a bit, much more than in my keyboard and mouse productions. I configure the MIDI mix to have dedicated knobs for sending signal to the return channel, reverb, and delays. Using the return channels in this way for transitional moments, I've found to be an effective way of keeping the sound flowing in the direction that it's already going. For the faders, I keep them dedicated to MIDI and audio effect adjustments. Usually I'll assign it to the most musical parameter, usually filter cutoff. To demonstrate on this simple loop, I can bring the cutoff up, take the kick out, send the signal to a long reverb, wait for the bar loop, cut the send off, bring the cutoff down, and it feels like a drop. It feels musically correct, like it was the right thing to happen. This is a simple example, obviously, but it demonstrates the primary way I keep things moving and flowing, and it can be expanded on with drum fills, white noise, and the like. To remember what these knobs actually do, I'd highly recommend getting some masking tape and labeling things. It looks a bit ugly, but trust me, it'll help you remember what's what. I'm considering getting another one of these MIDI mixes, as I have several more pages of instruments I could configure and optimize. You could set these exact devices up to suit whatever genre or style of electronic music you are writing or are into. I've gone through a lot of refinement, and this setup is nearly perfect, at least for me. This setup in a way feels like the cutting edge of music performance. Like we're just now discovering this way of performing music. And I'm super excited for what the future will hold in this field, for myself and others. This is a big question. Is it worth it? It depends what you want to invest your money and, more importantly, time in. If you want to push the envelope of music performance and use cutting edge technology to make art that is being performed and created right there and then in the moment, a living biological vessel of technologically enhanced creativity, then yes. If you want big frustration, technical issue rabbit holes, upward and downward spirals, raw emotions, and intense pre-show nerves, then yes. Do you want to express yourself on arguably the most expressive and expansive instruments created by humankind in beta form? Then yes. If you're willing to surrender to the possibility of technical issues, absolute total elation and or annihilation, then live electronic music is for you. If you don't want to take big risks and kind of put it all on the line, then this isn't for you. You also will need to be willing to smile and say thank you when people congratulate you with nice DJ set after your performance. Would I personally say it's worth it? Yes. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you liked it. I hope it was interesting. Subscribe and comment. Let me know if you want to see more of this. Thanks. Bye.